Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Asparagus Patties. That's right, it's officially spring, which is when a young man's fancy lightly turns to thoughts of love. And also experimenting with vegetables. But of course not at the same time. But anyway, the point is it's spring. And besides lots of thoughts of love, there's also lots of asparagus at the market. And since I'm always on a quest for new and exciting ways to cook it, I tried a little bit of an experiment at enjoying it in patty form, which really did come out quite well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by bringing some salted water to a boil. And by the way, when I say salted water in the context of cooking vegetables, I'm not talking about salting water like this. Right, that's just a big pinch. That does nothing. We're going to want to use like a spoon of salt. Right, that is one of the all-time secrets for cooking flavorful vegetables. And once properly salted, we'll bring that water to a boil on high heat. And once that water is boiling, we will use that to blanch our asparagus. And prepping that will be the next step. And what we have here is your standard 1-pound bunch of fresh spring asparagus. And as far as prep goes, all we really need to do is remove the woody bottom of the spear if necessary. And one trick you always hear on how to do that is to sort of bend the bottom of the spear like this. And they say it will snap right where the too tough to eat part starts. Except that's not always the case. All right, that little part was okay. So generally, I'm not a snapper, I'm more of a slicer. And these spears were pretty good and didn't require much trimming. And you can go one by one checking them out. Or you can go restaurant prep cook style and simply cut the bottom inch off every spear to play it safe. But anyway, we'll go ahead and trim the bottoms of those spears if necessary. At which point I decided to cut these in half, which by the way, you might not have to do. Right, I'm only doing that so they fit in my pan of boiling water. Speaking of which, once our water is boiling, we'll go ahead and transfer that asparagus in, where we will cook it for only 2 to 3 minutes. And that's sort of going to depend on the thickness of the spear. But regardless, we're just going to give this a very brief blanching, mostly to lock in that green color, but also to tenderize these just a little bit. So it's not so much that we're cooking the asparagus here, it's more that we're making the asparagus not raw. And then what we'll do after that's been in the water for a couple minutes is go ahead and transfer that into some ice cold water, which I should mention is not the same as water with ice in it. All right, as I've said before, save your ice cubes for your Manhattans. Just a big bowl of very cold water will do the job and stop the cooking. So we'll go ahead and let that asparagus cool completely in the water. And while we're waiting, we can go ahead and grate our cheese. And what I have here is exactly a 1-ounce piece of pecorino, although some Parmigiano Reggiano would also work beautifully. And the reason I'm going to show you this not so interesting grating scene is because there's often a lot of confusion about cheese measurements and recipes. And the reason for that is if you call for an ounce of grated cheese and people try to convert that to cups, it'll tell you to put in about 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup. But check it out. If you grate an ounce of this hard cheese on a microplane, it will pretty much fill a cup, which according to the internet is about 4 ounces of cheese. Except it's not, it's 1 ounce. And therein lies the confusion, which I may have just added to. But anyway, the point is we're going to grate exactly 1 ounce of cheese, and doing that by weight is the most accurate. And by now, after that long tortured explanation, our asparagus should be cold. And assuming it is, we'll drain that very well, and then proceed to slice it up in very, very small pieces. And of course, for an operation like this, we're definitely going to want to keep our fingertips bent back away from the knife. I mean, that just seems like common sense, but a lot of people don't do that. And since this was sort of an experiment, I wasn't exactly sure how small to slice this. All right, I was shooting for the largest pieces possible that would still hold together. And in hindsight, I probably could have cut it a little smaller, but we'll go over that. And then what we'll do once our asparagus is sliced up is add that to a bowl and proceed with the rest of the ingredients, which will include a nice big pinch of salt, as well as a little bit of freshly ground black pepper. And we'll also go ahead and shake in a little bit of cayenne just to stay in shape. And then once we've added our seasonings, we can move on to the binding agents. And here we're going to be using 3 of them. All right, the first will be our grated cheese. I know it looks like a ton, but it's only 1 ounce. We will also add to that some dry breadcrumbs. And then last but not least, a beaten egg. And we'll go ahead and take a spatula and mix this up. And anytime we're doing something like this and we're not sure if it should be 1 or 2 eggs, always start with 1 egg, since it's super easy to add more egg and literally impossible to remove some. So I started with just 1, and I gave it a mix. And as I stirred this together, it became apparent I was going to need that extra egg. So I stopped and added that in and continued mixing. And my overall game plan here was to have the maximum amount of asparagus possible, with just enough binder to keep those patties together so they didn't fall apart in the pan. But clearly 1 egg wasn't going to be enough. And as you can see, after stirring that second egg in, the mixture looked a lot better and much more pattyable. And then what we'll do once that's set is grab some to help portion these. Either some kind of spoon or one of these scoops, which I really like for portioning things evenly. And we'll go ahead and head over to the stove, where we're going to cook these in a little bit of olive oil over medium heat. And once I had that mixture placed in, I took a fork and kind of flattened it out a little bit, since that just seemed like a smart thing to do. And we're going to want to cook these for about 4 minutes aside, or until nicely browned and cooked through. And I have to admit, after about 4 minutes when I went to turn these, I was pretty sure they were going to totally crumble apart. But much to my surprise and delight, they actually held together quite nicely. And I just used the spatula to bring any rogue pieces back into the collective. And that's it. We'll give that side about 4 minutes. At which point they looked done, and sort of felt done, and that the inside didn't feel raw and mushy. So I figured it was time to get these out of the pan and onto a plate. And yes, one piece of asparagus did fall out. But let's not speak of that. Instead, let's go ahead and garnish this with a nice spoon of lemon aioli. And we will finish up with some lemon zest. And that's it. What we are calling asparagus patties are done. And looking very, very seasonably appropriate. Right, the surface almost looks like there's green plants starting to sprout up through the cold, dark soil. By the way, I stole that brilliant observation from my wife, Michelle. But anyway, I really did think this looked gorgeous. So I grabbed a fork to make sure it tasted just as good. And it really, really did. Like I said, I wanted this to be as asparagus-y as possible, with just the minimum amount of other ingredients needed to hold this together. So for an experiment, it really did come out nicely. And would have held together even better if we cut our asparagus a little bit smaller. Which I may do next time. Or not. It'll depend on my mood. And while this was absolutely delicious with that lemon aioli, these would probably be really good with other sauces like a hollandaise maybe. Or how about a remoulade? Or maybe we serve them even simpler with just some fresh lemon juice. Okay, so if you do make these, feel free to experiment. I mean, you are, after all, the Brittany of your spears. And speaking of oops, I did it again. I've never not regretted using lemon zest in one of these videos. I mean, it looks nice on camera, but I'm not sure that justifies how annoying it is. What we probably should have done is just used a microplane and just grate a little zest on there. Anyway, having said that, life is way too short to get upset over those kind of minor issues. What I really should be focusing on is just how fantastic this really was, and how much I really hope you give these a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.